Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on promoting educator wellbeing. We're absolutely delighted to have you join us here today. I'm Geri Sumpter, and I'm the head of BU Delivery at Beyond Blue, and I have the absolute honour today of being joined by Dr. Stephen Carbone, who I'll introduce to you after some formalities. So as we get started now, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of lands and waters throughout Australia and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm joining you today from Melbourne, Victoria, where it is a little bit windy and a little bit cloudy today, but I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. As we gather online today from all across our country, I invite you all to think about which land you're joining us from and reflect on what that connection means to you. And on behalf of the BU team, we recognise the importance of continued connection to culture, country and community, to the health and social emotional wellbeing of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children, young people and their families. We continue to embed Aboriginal ways of being, knowing and doing to all our BU practices. So as we learn online together today, I'm going to run through you a few points about how we will do this before we get into our content. Whilst I'm sure over the past few months you'll have been getting used to many different platforms, every platform is different. If you've not been used to our GoToWebinars, please explore the webinar control pane, and any issues, contact our team behind the scenes who are all there to help you today. We recognise also that you are coming to this conversation with lots of experience and knowledge that we'd encourage you to share, so please use the question box for this. Additionally, we will have a dedicated question and answer time where Steve and I will take on those questions, and we will try to answer as many of those questions for you today as we can do. So please pop your questions in the question box as you think of them, and Steve and I will address as many as we can during this time. We'll also be keen to theme those questions and answer those questions in a handout to you after the event, so you'll get something to take away with you. Please be reminded that this session will be recorded so you can watch it again, and you will also receive a certificate of participation for joining us today. So lots to look forward to as we head forwards. So just a little bit about BU for those that aren't too familiar with our initiative. It is a national mental health education initiative for educators, and Beyond Blue drives the initiative and is the organiser of this webinar. We do BU in conjunction with our partners Early Childhood Australia and Headspace. It's completely free. It's available to every educator, early learning service and school in Australia. So we do encourage you to jump onto our website and start having a look around and making yourself more familiar. BU empowers educators to support children and young people's social and emotional well-being and their own mental health. It offers educators online professional learning, fact sheets, online events, and many, many other resources, so please explore. It also offers learning communities tools and processes to implement a whole learning community approach to mental health and wellbeing, and we will be talking about this as we go through today's webinar. The discussions throughout the webinar will reference many of the resources that are there to show you how BU can really support you and a whole of school or early learning service approach to mental health and wellbeing. So I do have the absolute honour now of introducing you to Dr. Stephen Carbone. Steve is a former general practitioner turned public health expert who has a passion for promoting people's mental well-being. So hi Steve, nice to see you on the screen.
Hey, Geri.
Steve worked as a medical officer in Victoria's specialist mental health services and as a general practitioner in Melbourne for many years before moving into the area of mental health promotion. Here he is focused on promotion, prevention and early intervention. He has held public health positions in the Victorian Department of Health and Human Services and in non-government organisations such as Origin, Youth Health, Headspace, Vic Health and of course Beyond Blue. Stephen has a deep understanding of mental health. He also has experienced firsthand the impact of mental health conditions on people's lives through his support of those close to him. So with that introduction, Steve, I'm really keen to hand over to you for the day. I'm really excited for today's presentation.
Thank you very much, Geri, and thanks to Beyond Blue and the BU team for inviting me to be part of this webinar, and hello to all the audience out there. So just quickly, in terms of what we hope to cover today, the webinar will focus on helping you gain an understanding of the mental health continuum, learn ways to promote and protect your own mental health and well-being, but also to learn how to recognise and respond to whether you're experiencing mental health issues or a condition or someone close to you is, and also through the question and answers to understand the role of early learning service leaders and leaders in schools in terms of supporting educator wellbeing. So why exactly is it important to focus on educator wellbeing? Well, firstly, it's because we know that good mental health or mental health and wellbeing is an asset for life. The research shows that people who experiencing high levels of mental health and wellbeing tend to have better study, work, relationship and health outcomes. And actually, they also tend to live longer. By contrast, we know that people who experience low levels of mental well-being or a mental health condition like depression or anxiety often experience a lower quality of life, and also the conditions tend to impact their day-to-day functioning and performance. Now, I'm sure you'll all agree that in the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic and all the impacts it's had on our personal lives and on our professional lives, that it's now more important than ever to focus on promoting good mental health and preventing mental health conditions where we can, as well as looking out for and supporting people who may be experiencing mental health issues or conditions. And it's a bit like in the in-flight information when people talk about, you know, attach your face mask before your oxygen mask before you help those around you. You know, it's important to look after your own mental health to help you to be effective in your role in caring for the children and the students that you care for and in interacting with your colleagues. So I guess given the circumstances, we thought we'd run a very brief poll just to check in with people in the audience to see, you know, what sort of impacts COVID-19 might be having at this stage on your mental health and well-being. So I might call up the first of the poll questions and get people to address that. So the first question is, to what degree has COVID-19 impacted your work as an educator? And there's 4 response options there: not at all, a little, a moderate amount, or a large amount. So just give you a moment. Moving on to the next question. I'd like to ask, to what degree has COVID-19 impacted your personal life? And again, there's those 4 response options, and I'll give you a moment to select one. The third question is, to what degree has COVID-19 impacted your mental health and well-being, your own personal mental health and well-being? And again, not at all, a little, a moderate amount, or a large amount. And lastly, we'd just like to check how much of this impact on your mental health and well-being that you selected in question 3 is due to personal issues versus work issues. And the 3 options there are mostly personal, a mix of both, mostly work related. So I might just give you another minute or so to complete that, and then I might throw over to Geri to talk us through the poll results.
Fantastic. So if everybody's completed those questions, can we please draw up the poll answers? So in relation to our first question, to what degree has COVID-19 impacted your work as an educator? We've got a complete combination there, Steve. We've got 39% for a moderate amount and 39% for a large amount, with a little and not at all. Only 2% with not at all. So I think that shows the impact of COVID-19 on work during this period.
Absolutely.
Going on to our...
I'll let you go on, Geri.
Going on to our second question, to what degree has COVID-19 impacted your personal life? We've got a really similar split on here. So only 2% of people say not at all, with 45% being the highest result of a moderate amount, 31% saying a large amount. So we can see that that we have had some quite significant impacts on our personal life during this period.
The third question.
On to our third question: to what degree has COVID-19 impacted your mental health and well-being? There's a few on not at all, so 7% not at all, and 13% on a large amount. But to some degree, most people have been affected a little and a moderate amount. So 37% of you been affected with your mental health and well-being being impacted by a moderate amount, 43% being a little amount. So we can see that what has occurred over this period has impacted on our mental health and well-being. And our final question.
Yeah, but go through the last one.
Our final question: how much of this impact on your mental health and well-being is due to personal issues versus work issues? So 69% of people are saying a mix of both. And I think it always really is hard to differentiate between where the line is drawn between work and personal life. 21% of people saying mostly work, so 1 in 5 saying the work impact has been quite significant during this period. So I think that gives you plenty to work on there, Steve, in terms of where your presentation is heading today.
Yeah, and thanks, Geri. And I think that really exemplifies, and I know it's a bit of a hackneyed and cliched phrase that, we're all in this together, but it really demonstrates that, how you're feeling, you're not alone. You can see by the poll results, and we've got almost 900 people online at the moment. COVID-19 has been a major disruptor in our personal life, in our work life. And it's understandable, and it would be hard to believe that it wouldn't have at least some impact. And so very few people, said not at all. And so for some of us, it might be a little bit. For most of us, it's in the moderate range, but also for some of us, it's in the higher end. And so I guess that sort of, highlights why this talk is particularly important at this particular stage. So I might move on and start the presentation. So to begin, one of the most critical concepts I think that will help us understand this presentation is the mental health continuum. And this is from the BU resources, and you can find this on the BU website. So the important thing to understand is that our mental health exists on a continuum. And here at one end, we can call the high end of mental well-being, or positive mental health, or good mental health, which some people call flourishing. And at the other end of the continuum is where our mental health is impacted, and we may be experiencing a mental health condition, for example, depression or anxiety. And then there's a whole series of steps in between where we might be doing okay or starting to struggle, but not have a clinical mental health condition, right through to severe depression. And the other thing to remember is that our mental health is dynamic, and it fluctuates according to the things both that are happening around us and our own sort of personal resources. And so risk factors or negative factors tend to push us towards the red end or the lower end of the wellbeing spectrum, whereas protective factors, and we're going to talk about those a lot today, help us to stay at the flourishing or positive end of the mental health continuum. So in order to understand what we're talking about, I think it's important to define mental health and well-being, because it's different from mental illness or mental health conditions like depression, anxiety. Mental health and well-being is a multi-dimensional concept, and most theorists talk about 3 core aspects. Emotionally, it's about feeling generally happy, calm, and satisfied. Now, that doesn't mean, people who have got good mental well-being don't ever feel sad or worried or angry, particularly when, life circumstances are, throw us a curveball. But it's about how we can maintain an equilibrium and sit with those negative experiences without feeling overwhelmed by them. And so that's a sign of good mental health. Psychologically, it's about feeling positive about ourselves and to be able to function effectively, meet our responsibilities, be productive. But it's also about having a sense of control, a sense of meaning and purpose in life. And the social aspect of mental health and well-being is about experiencing positive relationships with others. And that also means people in the community having a sense of trust, a sense of belonging and connectedness with those around us, you know, immediately, but also in our neighbourhood, our community, our society. So, put briefly, mental health and well-being, or mental well-being, is about feeling good emotionally and functioning well psychologically and socially. And we can measure good mental health or mental health and well-being just the same way that we can measure whether someone may be experiencing a mental health condition like depression or anxiety. And nowadays, there's a number of scales that help people assess, you know, how the degree of flourishing they're experiencing, or the degree of good mental health. One of those is the Mental Health Continuum short form on the left. The other is the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Health Wellbeing Scale on the right, and there's a link there. So I encourage you to actually go online and use those resources and check out where you fall on the mental health or mental health and well-being continuum. You know, we've all got this stress bucket, and that, you know, when it fills up too much, we will start to feel overwhelmed. And so it's important to have strategies that we can use to de-stress and reduce that load on ourselves so that we don't feel overwhelmed or exhausted or depleted. And I guess I'm going to break those strategies up into two main categories. One I'm going to call self-care, and the other I'm going to call social supports. So in terms of self-care, self-care strategies are the things that we can do to maintain our mental well-being. And there's 4 key groups of strategies: healthy behaviours, relaxation, managing our feelings, and managing our mindset. In terms of healthy behaviours, these are the things we're all very, very familiar with. So it's about establishing a routine and having habits that you do or you perform on a daily or weekly or regular basis. One of those is staying physically active. We know that there's a strong connection between physical activity and our mental well-being, and studies have shown that you can boost your mental well-being by regular physical activity. For a number of reasons, including the release of certain, let's call them happy hormones that influence our mood. Likewise, there's now a lot of evidence around the link between what we eat and how we feel. And there are certain diets that can actually enhance our mental well-being, and there are other types of diets that can lower our mental well-being. And that includes diets that are too high in processed foods or eating too much junk food. It changes our gut flora, and that impacts on our mental health. It's also very important to get a good night's sleep. I mean, our body needs a chance to recuperate, to revive and restore. And people who don't get enough sleep are actually at higher risk of experiencing depression than people that get that, you know, usual 7, 8, 9 hours a night of sleep. It's also important to be very careful and, you know, reduce or avoid alcohol intake or other drugs. Whilst it can often make us feel good in the moment, it's counterproductive in the long term and contributes to mental health conditions, particularly depression. But it's also about what we do, you know, in order to have fun and enjoy life and relax. And so you need to schedule in that downtime, and that can be tricky when you're working from home and there's a blur between home life and work life, and particularly when you're juggling homeschooling of your own kids and things like that. But it's really, really important to factor in that sort of de-stress downtime to get you through. Relaxation is another big category of self-care, and you know, one way is through things like mindfulness meditation, where it's about, you know, clearing your mind and focusing on the here and now, rather than worrying too much about what happened in the past or what's going to happen in the future. It's about being in the moment, and that can actually help relax you and clear your mind of some of those worries. But you can also relax at a physical level or physiological level. Through deep breathing exercises. Just slowing down your breathing can have a very calming effect. Progressive muscle relaxation, yoga, Pilates, or body balance. It's anything that helps you to reduce that physical tension inside you. For others, it's about that sensory experience. It's about connecting with nature, or about listening to music or reading a good book. But the important thing here is all of these relaxation techniques, what they do is they dial down our flight or fight center, and stop the surge of adrenaline and other stress hormones that actually contributes to those negative feelings, and particularly those negative physical feelings. And then it is about managing our feelings. I mean, as I said before, worry, sadness, anger, I mean, they're all normal experiences and we can't avoid them. And most of the time we know through our own personal experience, we'll feel bad for a little while and it'll pass. It's often in relation to something negative that's happened to us. And so part of it is, you know, checking in and being more self-aware or reflecting on your mood, because that will help you to better regulate and manage your emotions. One of the big things that's essential is to acknowledge how you're feeling. And it's really critical that we don't bottle up things. You know, we all need to sometimes vent or debrief or just talk things over with someone we can trust. You know, it helps us to get more perspective on an issue. Some people can give us some support or advice, but sometimes it just helps, you know, to talk things through and get things off our chest. Be aware of how you relate to yourself. I mean, when we're under pressure, we can sometimes become a bit more self-critical and negative about ourselves. And, you know, that can be very, very damaging. And so it's really important that we cut ourselves some slack and show ourselves a bit of self-compassion. You know, it's impossible, it's absolutely impossible to be perfect during a pandemic. And so it's really important to realize that we're doing our best and we're trying our hardest. And even though some things might not always go the way we want them to go, you know, it's not our fault. And, you know, everyone, as we've seen already through the poll, is feeling that way. And so cut yourself a bit of slack. But by the same token, it's also nice to be kind and considerate and compassionate to others. They're feeling what you're feeling, as we've seen from that poll. And, you know, we know from research that expressing gratitude to others, you know, whether it's an email, a card, you know, or some gesture that expresses, you know, thanks for, you know, people that are doing things for you that you appreciate, because that can boost your mental well-being, but it also boosts theirs. So it's an incredible win-win situation. What we think has a big and powerful influence on how we feel. And as I said before, we have, as humans, this tendency to sometimes, you know, go towards the negative, you know, to look at the things that aren't going well rather than the things that are going well. And sometimes we can exaggerate or you know, make things bigger than they actually are. So it's important not to assume things or jump to conclusions, but sit down and in your head assess the facts. You know, maintain some perspective, some balance. You know, clearly there will be negative things, but life isn't all negative and experiences aren't all negative. And when you get into that frame of mind where you can feel that inner critic or that inner negative voice, it's important to sort of talk to yourself back and challenge that negative self-talk, and talk to yourself as if you were talking to a friend or a colleague who you're trying to reassure or you're trying to help them through a tough time. So that inner voice becomes more positive rather than overly negative and critical. It's also important to, as we say to our children and students, you know, maintain that growth mindset. You know, life's about trial and error and continual improvement. We don't always get things right first time, but if we persist and we just try, we'll get there in the end. Obviously, you know, some things can't change, and we just need to accept those things, but we can still move forward. It's that idea that, you know, things might be bad now, but they will get better. And we already saw that in relation to COVID-19 in parts of Australia that have done okay. Despite this global pandemic, you know, they've managed to restore a bit of normality. And even here in Victoria, where we're going through a second wave, we're getting over the other side of that. I mean, the human species is incredibly resilient. We've been, as humans, you know, through incredibly difficult times, and we've managed to find our way through that. And personally, all of us, I'm sure, have been through that as well. So it helps to just keep focusing on the big picture, not the small picture. What's important to you, not just what's happening here and now, and work towards that. There'll be interruptions, there'll be bumps along the road, there'll be things that you weren't expecting. But if you keep your eye on what you're trying to achieve as an educator, as a person in your life, that will get you through some of the tougher times. So partly it's about being realistic. Of course, things aren't great, and it's stressful when you're having to change your whole approach to teaching. But it's important also not to be overly pessimistic. So part realist, part optimist. Now, whilst there are some of the things that we can do ourselves, it's clear that our mental well-being, it relies on or is supported by our interactions, our relationships with other people. We know from research that a sense of loneliness or a sense of lack of belonging can harm our mental health and well-being. Whereas if we invest time and energy to grow and deepen and maintain our relationships and build our social networks, that can have incredibly positive effects on our mental health. It's about the quality mainly, but it is also about the quantity. The more people in our lives, the research shows, generally the more mentally healthy we feel. But it's not just your immediate social network, it's also being part of the community. And we know, again, from research that being something bigger than yourself, people who volunteer, people who are involved in group activities, people who are involved in spiritual pursuits tend to be happier than people who aren't. And so it's about our place in the world can give us a sense of purpose and meaning and make us feel mentally well. But of course, we can do all those things, but we can still find ourselves moving towards the right-hand side of that spectrum where we're experiencing mental health issues or conditions. And so it's important to be able to tune in and recognize when that might be happening. And so, one of the things to remember is it's extremely common to experience mental health issues or conditions. 1 in 2 people over their lifetime will experience a significant episode of mental ill health. So you're not alone, and it's no one's fault. These are just conditions that happen. Now, that can vary from mild stress through to psychological distress or severe mental health conditions. And the signs and symptoms will vary, but typically involve changes in the following areas. Physically, you might notice that your sleep pattern changes and you're having trouble sleeping in particular. You may feel that you lack energy or feel easily fatigued. If you're experiencing anxiety, you're likely to feel tense and restless and fidgety. You may experience a change in your appetite. For depression, it can be low appetite, but it can also be binge eating and comfort eating. And also we can experience more physical symptoms such as headaches and tummy aches and aches and pains. Emotionally, depression is characterized by this sense of intense and persistent emptiness or sadness, accompanied by a loss of interest or pleasure in the things that you used to enjoy. And when you're feeling anxiety, it can be this sense of intense or persistent worry, nervousness, fear, panic, and also it can actually, manifest as moodiness or irritability, frustration or anger, particularly depression. Our thought processes change. At a basic level, we might find it harder to focus or concentrate or remember things. We might start to become overly pessimistic and critical, thinking negatively about ourselves, our life, our future. And sometimes we may feel that life is no longer worth living. We may constantly feel worried or distracted. We can't get things out of our head. We just keep going back to the same issue over and over and over again. We may catastrophize and start to look at worst case scenarios and think the worst is going to happen. And sometimes it's really just hard to stop what's going on in your head, and you find it hard to switch it off. Behavior, we may, as I said, feel that loss of motivation. We do less. We might get grumpy, yell. We start to have difficulties in our relationships and may start to experience more frequent arguments. We may also just start to become more socially withdrawn and distant from others. And basically, we just can't get the things done that we used to be able to do well. There's a drop in our productivity. There's a drop in our performance. And some people, as I said, start drinking to cope, taking drugs to escape or feel better. And more seriously, some people feel, they self-harm to try to escape or deal with those negative emotions. So just like there's ways that you can measure your good mental health, or whether you're on the flourishing end of the spectrum, you can also measure mental health symptoms. And there are plenty of online checklists, including the K10 that's on the Beyond Blue website, that can help to determine whether you might be in that situation of experiencing high or very high levels of psychological distress indicative of a mental health condition. So if you do feel that you're at that point, help is available, and it's really, really important to recognise that it's okay to not be okay, and it's nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about. And the sooner you reach out to others and seek support, the better. I really urge people and encourage people not to wait until they feel they're at rock bottom or in crisis to seek advice or support. We know that early intervention, we preach it around our children and our adolescents and young people, but it applies to us as well. The earlier we get that professional support when we need it, the better. Now, if you need an interpreter, when you're contacting any of those helplines, the telephone or the translating interpreting services is available. And for Indigenous Australians, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, there's a lot of information on Health Infonet that you'll find helpful. And obviously on this slide, you'll see the many support options that you can turn to. And if you feel you're able to, and if your mental health is okay, it's also important to reach out and try to recognise and support others who might be doing it tough or struggling to cope. As we know through Are You OK Day, or Are You OK, it's important to ask that question and then, dig a bit deeper, let the person talk. The main role there is to listen, to offer some support, and then to encourage people to maybe reach out to professional support. You don't have to become a counsellor yourself. And it's okay, and it's important to check on suicide risk. You're not going to put ideas into people's heads, and it's important to check in and then again encourage people. And there are resources on the Beyond Blue website, that can really help you have the conversation and know what to do next, so you feel empowered rather than worried about asking those questions. And similarly, Are You OK Day's got a lot of those resources too. So just to recap, in this part of the presentation, we talked about the mental health continuum and understanding that our mental health varies from high to low and anywhere in between, and that there are steps that we can take to be able to keep us at the more flourishing end of the spectrum. And those include a whole raft of self-care strategies. You'll find the one that works best for you, but it's important to have more than one string to your bow or more than one strategy in your toolkit. And of course, social supports from those around you. But it's also important to be able to recognise when you or someone around you might be experiencing the onset of a mental health condition like depression, and hopefully you've seen where you can go to seek support. So I might now invite Geri back on to the line, and we're just going to have a question and answer session. So Geri.
Hello, Steve. Thank you. That was a great presentation, and I'm sure there's plenty of people who've got some great takeaways from that. And there's some great conversation coming through in the question box. So please keep your questions coming. So, Steve, just going back to the mental health continuum as a concept, can you please explain why that concept's so important, and then how we can apply this in our everyday lives?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to recognise that the term mental health has possibly become too synonymous with mental illness or mental health conditions like depression and anxiety. But mental health, or good mental health, is different, and we need to make space for that as part of the conversation. So the mental health continuum helps us to visualize that. On that spectrum, we can see whether we're at the optimal or flourishing or good mental health end of the spectrum, whether we're somewhere in the middle where we're doing okay but starting to show some signs of stress or distress, or that we've tipped over into the sort of the more worrying end where we may be experiencing a mental health condition. So because it also allows you to check in where I am on that continuum and then take the appropriate steps to get you back towards that flourishing end. So I think it's just a good mental concept that you can keep in your mind and ask yourself, where am I on the continuum right now, and how can I get myself back to the flourishing end if I'm not quite there?
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And it was interesting because when the polls came through, some info came through on that question line talking about the fact that the impact of COVID-19 had actually been positive for some people. So how do you respond to that one, Steve?
Yeah, look, I think there's some evidence to show that, you know, when there is this sort of community sort of when everyone's experiencing something simultaneously, that banding together and that sort of coming together to fight this sort of adversity can actually create bonding and build that sort of trust and belonging and sense of community, and it makes us feel positive because we are working together to deal with this. And I think it's also given us some time to reflect on our lives. And a lot of people have talked about, hey, look, I realize now I was probably, you know, running on empty and, you know, there were too many things on my plate. And now I've had time to sort of kick back a little bit. I don't have to commute for an hour a day and be stuck in traffic. I spend more time with my family or the people that are important to me. So, you know, it has been a positive for some people, but it's clearly been a negative for a lot of people, particularly people who, you know, whose livelihood has been impacted. So people whose businesses, you know, have had to close and people who have lost their job. You know, clearly it's varied across the community, but that's why I think some people have experienced an upside, but there's also a lot of people that have experienced a downside.
Yeah, and I've personally found it really important to try to highlight those what we're classing in our household as the COVID wins. So the things that have actually been beneficial for you during this period, and focusing on that positivity that can lead into for ourselves.
Absolutely. Look, you know, and those of us who, you know, not in the education space, you know, I'm not going to work in an office anymore. I'm going to work from home all the time from here on in. So, look, just joking. But look, obviously there are some benefits. We can see things can be done differently, and humans are so innovative. Humans can sort of learn and change things and adapt so quickly. And the educators I know, including members of my family, it's just been terrific in the way they've been able to adapt, you know, to such a major challenge in such a short space of time. So, you know, I really think that exemplifies, you know, that's the good part, and people need to remember that, and that is one of the wins you're talking about.
Yeah, fantastic. And there's been some commentary coming through on the questions as well around some of the strategies that people are finding helpful. So items such as the Smiling Mind app, then join the Resilience Project, etc. And you mentioned some self-care strategies and tools that people can use. But are some of these better than others?
Look, I think that's a great question. I mean, the first thing to say is that, look, self-care is a very personal thing, and it's about finding what's right for you, what works for you, and it's going to be a little bit different for each and every one of us, and that's why it's good to have that awareness of the broad array. And it's great that people are sharing their tips and their strategies and their own personal experiences, you know, online, because that's how we learn. We feed off what other people are doing and we try it for ourselves. But the key thing to remember is that there's not going to be one single thing that's going to keep you at that flourishing end of the spectrum. You need a breadth of strategies, and you know, have that toolkit, and maybe one or two from each of those four categories I talked about. You know, the healthy lifestyle categories, the relaxation category, the healthy mindset, the social connection. So don't rely on one thing to get you through. You know, try a few different things, and that generally tends to work better.
Yeah, fantastic. And some other examples of the strategies that people have been sharing. We're going and playing golf.
Yep.
Avoiding caffeine, dairy, gluten-free, and I've personally been on that journey over the past few weeks and certainly feel better for it, having this sort of the clean living. Somebody mentioned, which I really like, is doing something for you. So not work-related and not home-related, but just related to something that you really want to enjoy.
Absolutely. And I think this is a critical thing, that self-care is about self. Now, that's not self-indulgent to look after your mental health. That's just very, very sensible. And, you know, so you do need to take that time for yourself. And look, you know, I think that it's not only what individuals are doing, but I gather schools and education departments. I know, you know, I've been told that the Department of Education Victoria has sort of set up a virtual gym, and teachers can sort of access that and look after their mental health through their physical health. Some schools are running sort of Wellbeing Wednesdays, where people take a little bit of time off screen and just look after themselves. And obviously it's that whole school approach. You're part of the school community, so it's not just about your students and about parents, it's about you and your colleagues. And so it's perfectly reasonable to practice that self-care in whatever way works for you.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's interesting, another question that's come through is around what would you suggest for people who feel like they need to achieve something in order to earn that downtime?
Look, I think we all have different personality characteristics, and I think there's that sense of somehow, with people with very strong work ethics, it's about, I've got to give, I've got to, do well for others, I don't deserve this. Of course you deserve this. Of course you have to, look after yourself. I mean, why are you any different from the people that you love and that you care for, or that you're trying to educate? You wouldn't say that to them. You wouldn't say, no, you haven't earned this. So why say that back to yourself? And I think it really is about understanding life's about balance. It's a give and take situation. And of course, it's reasonable, that when you feel you need it, you need it. And, we all need time to de-stress, to refresh and recharge. We can't put it on hold. We can't wait and kick it down the road, because what will happen is that stress bucket will fill and fill and fill, and you'll become overwhelmed. So you've got to drill some holes in it every so often. Don't wait.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And it leads very well segueing into the next question, which is that many people would say that being an educator across both early learning services and the school sectors is an inherently stressful job. So how can people tell when their stress is okay or when it is too much?
Yeah, it is an incredibly stressful job, and I really applaud. And as I said, I have family members who are educators. I wouldn't be able to do it. So the fact that people are doing this job, and in particular, the responsibility that comes with it, both for the students, and their parents, and dealing with, juggling all the demands that are on your plate. I mean, I think it is inherently stressful. And so, look, we know a little bit of stress is okay, and in fact, it's important. It actually psychs us up and keeps us motivated and helps us to form at our peak. But you have to be careful then you don't come down to the downside of that curve, where you're starting to feel fatigued or depleted or overwhelmed or burnt out. And so, some of the things I mentioned around the signs and symptoms of depression and anxiety, they're also telltale signs that you're probably slipping towards, the more depleted or burnt out or distressed side of the curve. And so they're the red flags. Your sleep changes, your appetite changes, your energy level changes, you can't perform to your optimum, you're feeling that you're annoyed with or don't want to relate to people around you. That's a sign that, you need to take time for yourself, recharge, refresh, or perhaps seek professional support, if it's really getting on top of you. Like I said, it's okay to not be okay. It happens. We all are going to experience it at some time in our life. So if you feel that way, reach out to colleagues, friends, family, but also to professional supports.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Steve. And another sort of theme that's coming through on the questions is around how do you approach this topic when you notice these behaviour changes in colleagues or amongst your family and friends?
Yeah, and look, that's always tricky. It's often that, sometimes people aren't tuned into their own stress levels, and you will be the first person to recognize it. And, you don't have to, I mean, but it can be important and very helpful that for that person, if someone, takes interest in them, reaches out, asks that, that basic question, are you okay? But then, has that conversation and takes it a bit further. Like I said, you need those role boundaries. Your colleagues, your friends, your family members, you're not their counsellor, you're not their support person. But that doesn't mean you can't show empathy, compassion, care, and then direct people to the sorts of professional services that will be able to help them. So, I think it's the more you learn about how to have those conversations, the more you'll feel able to sort of step in without taking on too much responsibility. And I encourage people to have a look at the Beyond Blue website and, even the Are You OK website to learn, how to step in and ask those questions and then be able to detach and just really let the person, take the next step. So, I think that's how to approach it.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that message around you're not diagnosing or treating people when you're going down those steps. You're guiding them
Exactly right.
into
It's about
to
showing
that
that you're
pathway.
worried. You're not a clinician having to try to define whether someone has or hasn't got a condition. You're just saying, I see you struggling. It looks like you're not coping. Are you okay? Can I help? Have you used our EAP? Have you phoned this hotline? I've heard some really good things about it. Why don't you give it a go?
Yeah, fantastic. And there's some comments coming through as well around often you don't recognize these changes in yourself until someone points it out. And it's so important at this time that you do take that step to ask that question. So going on
Exactly.
from here, Steve, there's also questions around the workplace. So we talk about the shared approach to student wellbeing. So what about worker wellbeing? What role does the workplace play in this?
Look, absolutely, Geri, and that's the thing to stress here. I mean, mental health is a shared responsibility. We've all got a role to play, our own individual well-being and those around us. And I think we know that workplaces have both got a moral but also a legal responsibility, to protect their staff, their workforce against psychological injury or work-related mental health conditions. And so there is a level of responsibility that has to go back onto, the management team, the leadership team, the department, where, they put in place as much as possible the protective factors and focus on the risk factors that are eliminating the risk factors that might contribute to poor mental health in the workplace. And there's a whole raft of what we call psychosocial risk factors at work that relate to, the level of control you have over your work, the demands that are placed on you, the time you have to do that, the level of training and support that you have to do the job you have to do. And it's an employer's responsibility to try to help and get those things right. Now, no one's perfect, and everyone's trying to do their best. And COVID-19 is this thing that's impacted our leaders as well as ourselves. And I think that everyone is trying to take account of that and offer support to their staff. But we're working our way through this, and we don't always have all the answers. So now I'm not trying to get them to shirk that responsibility, but I also think that we have to respect that we can't change everything, and so it's that balance, and we just need to do our best and share the load.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that with the workplace mental health side of things as well, mental health hazards aren't as necessarily as straightforward to spot as a traditional occupational health and safety hazard. So there's not the cable on the floor that's there to trip us up. So often it's all about the conversations that you have around what's causing people that stress in their workplace that can lead to the identification of those challenges that might be increasing stress levels.
Exactly right. And look, I think at the moment there's a couple of things that are happening across education settings. I mean, obviously we need to first and foremost attend to making workplaces COVID safe, and I guess that's part of the leadership team's responsibility. But also, in Victoria, if we're still in remote learning, it's about recognising that there's a bit of that scaffolding that's been lost around collegiality and working together and supporting one another. And so we have to find some sort of replacement, to deal with that during that time. So I think there are some generic issues that it's important that workplaces are on top of for the benefit of their staff. But the other thing is about having those programs in place, like the EAP or the referral pathways for people who feel they need that personal support. Again, it doesn't mean not to wait until you're in crisis, but to encourage people to look after their well-being. Even when they're in that I'm a little bit affected, because I don't want people to get to I'm a lot affected. And and I think some the Heads Up website that Beyond Blue has got around workplace mental wellbeing, is an excellent resource for team leaders and employers broadly. And I'd really, really encourage people to access the Heads Up resources. And there's some other websites out there as well that have some similar information. So don't feel it's entirely up to you. Speak on behalf of yourself, on behalf of your colleagues, if you think there are some improvements that can happen at the collective level that are going to be good for everyone.
Yeah, fantastic. No, that sounds like great advice. And there is another question that's comes through around promoting mental health and well-being in the workplace, and what's some tips you can give there?
Look, I think, as I said, in some ways it starts with a plan. I mean, these things work better when they're understood to be part of core business, and that there's some sort of, mental health promotion or mental well-being plan in the organisation that covers off on those sort of three big aspects. Protecting mental health and well-being, preventing mental health conditions, but responding to people who may be experiencing those and supporting them through that period, because people will get better, and the more they can stay involved in their work, the better. But if they need to take time out or have adjustments, these things need to be structured into policies and protocols, and be there in advance rather than ad hoc and sort of developed in a reactive sense. So I think every school needs to have a mental health and wellbeing plan for its students, and every early learning service for its kids. But also for its staff. And if it's not there, it's one of the things that, as a staff group, it's great to think about and encourage the organisation to put in place. And as I said, there's a lot of templates, there's a lot of resources that are available on Heads Up, but a plan and structure, policies and protocols are important. And then the usual things, like I said, Department of Education offering, that virtual access to virtual gym, that's fantastic.
Yeah, so all sorts of things that we're getting creative with, excuse me, and agile with in these times. And just another sort of commentary on this. We've got a bit of a question around what if you're trying to support someone but they're refusing to get help for whatever it may be that's going on for them? How far do we need to push, or what sort of boundaries should we think about for ourselves?
Yeah, that's absolutely one of the curliest and most complex questions in the mental health field, because that does happen. I mean, regrettably, we as a professional, I've come across it. As a family member, I've come across it. And it's a really tough call. And I think it's about the more we can normalize, destigmatize, make people understand that this is not a judgment on them. This is not about saying anything negative about them. It's about recognizing that we all have a stress bucket, and sometimes we get to the top of that and we feel distressed and overwhelmed. And there are some times when your friends and family can help you through that, but sometimes it's going to need an expert or a professional to help you through that. And sometimes you just need to chip away and keep encouraging people, shine the light in that direction. But you can't force people. That's not your role. And that is really only the role of professionals who are empowered to maybe make that judgment. But that's the option of last resort, where someone may need to receive care on an involuntary basis. And usually when you're at that point, because there's a real risk that there's a serious danger that the person may harm themselves or harm other people. But that's a professional decision to make. That's not a personal decision. And just keep plugging away, offering support, offering encouragement, but not nagging or lecturing or telling people off. But look, you can only do what you can do, and as private individuals, as opposed to health professionals, we can only be there and encourage. We can't force people.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Stephen. I think that's really important to mention there. So we are coming to the end of our time together, but I've got a question for you. So what do you do for your own mental health, Steve?
I knew I was going to be asked this. Probably nothing there on the list. No, that's not true. Look, I find just people's company. I guess I find work relaxing, strangely enough. But I like getting out, I guess, into the garden and into nature. I just love being around green and you know, that sort of freshness and that stuff. And you know, I'd say I relax by watching the football, but at the moment my side's doing so poorly that doesn't relax me really.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you for all that absolutely incredible information. I'm sure that's been super valuable for everybody that's here on the webinar today, and for those that will watch this moving forward. So thank you very much, Steve. And the questions that we didn't get around to answering for people today, they've all been fantastic, but we will make sure that they are addressed and they're themed out in a handout that will be distributed post the webinar. So thanks very much, Steve, from all of us. So
No problem.
just to start to wrap up for the conversation, I do want to encourage you to think about talking to your team about BU and talking to your colleagues and exploring our website yourselves. It is a fantastic initiative, as I said, with lots of fact sheets, lots of information, professional learning modules, and then also that support to create a mentally healthy workplace, a mentally healthy learning community for yourselves. So register for and complete our BU Professional Learning if you haven't done so already. Jump on there and check out all of our tools and then all of those that we also then reach out to. And consider other individual or school-based opportunities to build your knowledge and skills in educator wellbeing. And this topic is going to be a bit of a focus for BU over this next period, so keep referring back to us and checking in to see what information we have moving in there. If you are a registered learning community, you can also reach out to your consultant for some support from an action team leader level, and the consultants will be able to also guide you through some more information on where you can find out further supports or tools that you might need to reference. So we continue to encourage you to learn more about BU. Make sure you are registering as a whole learning community so you as a collective with your colleagues can receive that further support. Visit our website and access all of those resources. And follow our BU social media channels to keep yourselves completely up to date with where we're at. We've got, as you can see there, the normal, the Facebook, the LinkedIn and the Twitter, but we've also got a YouTube channel. So have a check that out and see what we've got to offer on there. You can also see our suite of previously recorded webinars on our website, so you can access all the different topics that we've covered within our In Focus sessions. So I would like to wrap up there by thanking you all for your participation and your attendance today. I know it's sometimes challenging to take time out of your busy conversations to come and attend a webinar, so I do hope that you enjoyed it, and we'll come back to see us again soon. I'd like to also again thank Steve for all his expertise. I'd like to thank our team behind the scenes, and everybody knows who they are from that perspective. They've been fabulous, and I've seen all of the questions coming through and being answered by our moderators. So thanks again to everybody that supported to get this webinar up and running for today. For yourselves, you will, as I said, receive a certificate of participation for attending today. We will have the recorded materials out to you soon. And just wanted to let you know that post this session, you will be driven to a survey so that we can seek your feedback on how we went today, and also looking at some topics for future webinars that you may be interested in. So please give us your information, your support, and help us to continue and improve as we move forwards. And just to finish off with, what I would like to say is that because you did attend today's session, because it is always challenging to think about our mental health, what I would like for you to do today is to take that treat for yourself. So your recognition for having attended the session today, have a little treat, do something you wouldn't normally be doing for yourself on a Thursday night. So if you don't normally go for the walk or take that 10 minutes to read a book for yourself, do that tonight as praise for yourself for having attended today. And with that, I'll leave that there. Thank you very much. Don't forget to look at our BU website, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thanks very much.